At LUG 2013 in San Diego, there was a very expressed interest in a Windows native client. I remember after one of the sessions, a bunch of people talking and asking questions and saying, hey, Xyratex, what about that IP you acquired from Oracle? What's going on with the Windows native client? So that's what I'm here to talk about today. There is a Windows native client prototype in the IP that we acquired. And it is rather old, but it has some useful material that'll be a good starting point. A lot of this presentation is asking for feedback. I'm very much a fan of the minimal feature set to make things work, to make a useful thing that people want and that people would use. So there's a lot of items in red in the presentation where I welcome and encourage feedback, and we'll go through each of those items individually, but please let me know what you're going to find useful for this Windows native client. There's also a funding proposal into OpenSFS for, well, it's going to be submitted to OpenSFS shortly for the Windows native client. So keep in mind as you're looking at this presentation, getting funding from the community for this project. So today, what's done is people have a CIFS or PCIFS gateway or an NFS gateway. We heard Warp Media at LUG 2013 in San Diego talk about running Windows in a Linux hypervisor, which I was going, really? People use that, and apparently it works, and they think it's a temporary solution that's maybe okay for staging small data. I imagine that it's useful for things like a Dropbox style access where you're just using small files and you really don't need something that's performant. So with all of these solutions, you have a limited number of gateways, you have bottlenecks, you're going through one single choke point. And so I can't imagine that you're getting very good performance. Coherency between the gateways is an issue, and the data flows, and you have additional layers of software that are really being band-aided and glued together and weren't meant to work together from the ground up. So for a Windows native client, we're hoping to address those and get something that's performant and works well. So currently there is an existing prototype. Like I said, it's older, but it does work. You can actually mount and unmount the Lustre file system. You have basic metadata operations, so you can ls, you can open, you can delete, you can get attributes. This is fantastic. File I/O is direct I/O only. There's cached and mmap prototyping in there, but they don't work completely. I'll talk in a minute about what needs to be done to get those working. LNet is there, so you can use network. Byte range locks are there. Directory change notification is there. This one is really important for Windows because Windows Explorer needs it to deal with change notifications. If you don't have this, Windows is essentially ls minus L'ing your file system every 30 seconds or something. We all know how well that would be handled by any parallel file system. So the known issues, the mmap lock implementation has issues. For a good beta that people could actually use, we would really need to fix a couple of things in this mmap implementation. And I'm told that mmap is relatively important. A lot of people use it. So we would have to address the issue. And the issue is that the Linux kernel and the Windows kernel work differently. I'm sure that doesn't surprise anyone here. But in the Windows kernel, there's no way to collect all of the virtual addresses for the file memory map. So the proposed solution, the current thinking, is that we would have to hook into the Windows kernel driver, which is not wonderful, but it would work. The emulated page layer was introduced basically because Clio depends very heavily on page manipulation. Again, this is an issue of the Windows kernel just working differently. Clio depends heavily on page manipulation and memory management, and so the emulated page layer, we needed memory management and resource reaver. So it's a little bit of an issue, it's a little bit of a performance issue, which I never want to hear. and it might have some bugs. So a better solution probably needs to be found, or there needs to be some work to make the emulated page layer better. We do have some work being proposed with OpenSFS to simplify the Clio layer, which could end up being a very good thing for this page layer. So we'll have to keep that in mind as that work progresses. We'll have to keep focus on that and make sure that we're making these two things work together as usefully as possible. Compiler issues. Windows, the compiler of choice is WinDDK. And it's different than GCC, the Linux favorite. GCC is very powerful and has many, many features that WinDDK does not. So when you try to sync the Windows native client with the Linux make files in GCC, you get a whole mash of things that aren't compatible. So there's a thought that we could use MinWGC, which is the Windows version of GCC, sort of. It's a lot closer. The problem is it's not as efficient, so it's not as good, and we would have to redo some other project and make files. This is more of an implementation issue. I think whoever ultimately ends up working on this project and implementing it will just have to make a decision on which compiler to use. Either one has side effects that aren't necessarily wonderful for both of them, but it's just going to be a decision. Testing is a hard thing in Windows for file systems drivers. The most common way to test file systems drivers in Windows, it turns out, is to use Windows applications. So this is a thing where we would definitely want a test suite from the community of common applications to make sure that we cover all of the issues that people are going to run into. So these are some of the to-dos. The branch code sync. First of all, we're thinking that, depending on the compiler issues I was just talking about, they're going to probably have to happen weekly. It's a major thing to be syncing these. The Windows effort is going to be a big code base, and it's going to have to be synced very, very frequently with the current Lustre code base. Read ahead, probably an absolute necessity, so it's in black. There's two things to do here. We have to enlarge the user's request windows. That right now they're small and they need to be enlarged to RPC size. And then the second thing is that we need to predict the next user read ahead. Windows uses a kernel routine called prefetch pages, and it internally triggers a system thread, and so that pool has to be ready for the user request. So I think we're going to have to get an additional RPC after every read just to be ready for this next step that Windows automatically does. I think that's doable, though. CIFS resharing. This is one where I'm tempted to say, not allowed, don't do it. But we'll see what the community thinks about that. If this is something people really want, definitely let us know. I'm not sure the value in having a Windows native client and then having a server resharing the files via CIFS, but maybe somebody needs to do that. I don't know. That's something that we need to hear back on. But there's two issues with it if we want to do it. There's the cache pages collection request. It's originated by the server, by the SMB CIFS server, but we would need to handle that. Then the second issue is the op lock handling. We need to balance the client-side cache. So both of those would have to be done. Xadders, probably not an option, and I think it should be relatively straightforward from our scoping. But security support with ACLs, ACLs can be complicated and very convoluted, and this is another one where I'm kind of thinking, oh, we don't really need that, do we? So it'll be interesting to see what people think about that if they are used in some of the Windows applications that are used. We'd like to know. Links and symlinks. Not sure if they're needed on the Windows side, not sure if people use them, so that would be good to know. As we're starting to look at the oil and gas have their interpretation tools, and some of the media and entertainment have Windows files that they want to use. I'm not seeing a lot of links and symlinks, but I haven't looked into it too deeply. If they are needed, I think it's easy to handle in the code. Params tree port. This is like Nathan was talking about yesterday. Other operating systems do not have /proc. Windows is no exception. There is no /proc. And so we're wondering, well, do we need to bring over the params tree support? Well, maybe, because it's needed for things like turning on and off checksums, for instance. So I'm not quite sure if that needs to be ported over or not, but that's one of the things that we're thinking about. Another one is the LCTL and LFS. Not sure if we really need these. I don't know if people are going to need to set Stripe for their Windows applications. If we're looking for big performance, maybe they do. Maybe this could be a V2 kind of thing. Documentation is needed. The prototype does not have a whole lot of documentation. That's probably a pretty normal thing, but to have an actual beta that other people can use, we're probably going to need it and have to focus on it and get it done. Code page support. This is for fonts, basically. And I don't know if Windows, if, you know, gee, do I care if it's displaying in Arial or Times New Roman? Probably not. But for displaying in other languages, maybe that's important. So we're sort of thinking, well, I don't know, is UTF-8 good enough? That's provided natively in Windows 7 and beyond. So that may be something where we can leverage what's already there for free, unless people need other than UTF-8. Testing is an issue. There's the ACC-SM. I can't imagine porting over the whole thing. That would be a lot of work. So what we're talking about is just bringing in the run test insanity tests, which would be a smaller subset. I think that would be nice. There could be several different ways to do testing. You could use Cygwin. It's where you can sort of run Linux within your Windows machine. You get a shell prompt and everything. So that could work. There's also a MinGW has an MSys testing that we could use. Or there's SUA subsystem testing for Unix provided by Microsoft that we could also use. That has no GCC, by the way, though, so that's going to depend on the implementation choice for the compiler. But all of those different methods for testing, I think it's really important to stay in tune with the rest of the Lustre community. We need to make sure that things work and work well. So bringing over the testing framework that people are already using is probably important instead of just developing a new test framework. I think that we need to leverage some of what the community's already done. YALA integration depends on the LCTL and LFS porting, so if we want YALA, that's one of the things that we're going to have to do. Windows doesn't guarantee module unloads, though, and the YALA framework seems to be dependent on that. Currently, the Lustre client modules are all a single driver, so unloading and loading would be a problem. You would have to completely start everything brand new every time, which would not be fun. There's also third-party tool integration, things like IOR, IObench, dbench, MD test, you know, all of these things that you want to use in your regression testing. These would all have to be ported to Windows. GUI tools. I think this is one of those things that would be nice to have. This is one of the things that could be a differentiator for an open source WNC client. People could develop different GUI tools, or we could work on GUI tools as an open source thing. I think that will probably end up being a community decision. We'll look and see what the best thing is going to be. The mmap conflict detection I already talked about, and cached I/O I talked about. So the risks for a Windows native client beta that everybody could use. The caching, it's complex. It's a big problem. It is going to be especially hard with multiple metadata servers coming up. D&E is going to make this much harder. So that's a risk. mmap is a risk if we decide to do it. One of the big problems with hooking turns out to be antivirus software. When Windows users have things running, they have these various antivirus programs can really start messing with some of the Lustre calls and writes that are going through. So that would be something that we would have to look at and address. The Lustre file system is constantly changing. A lot of you are working very hard on making it better. This makes it hard for the Windows client integration, though. Things like the Clio simplification, that's a big deal. And as we look at trying to make Windows work with Lustre, these changes coming in makes syncing hard. But I suppose that's just something you have to deal with. The code cleanup is another thing I worry about for the Windows integration, just because in part of the proposal it was talking about cleaning up some of the Windows calls that were there, and I'm not sure how many of them could be useful. You know, how many of them could we use as we look at doing a WNC client? Licensing. This one I'm very tempted to just say leave it to the lawyers. I'm not going to worry about it. But it is something that we have to worry about. We have to work with Microsoft for how to license this, how would we sell it, how is it, you know, GPL v2, Microsoft license, how are these things going to work together? This would have to be worked out to really make this a viable thing that people could use. So there's a couple alternatives that have been considered. Like I was talking about earlier, people do run Windows in a hypervisor on Linux, and it works. You can export via SMB or via NFS just fine. So these are alternatives that people have thought about. One that I didn't think about until recently, PSIFs directly to the OSS. I actually really like this alternative, and I have to confess right away that this is not my idea, this is Peter Brom's idea. But the more I think about it, the more I like it. And I have an architecture diagram. I didn't have time to include it, but I found it the other night on lustre.org. There's a really nice architecture diagram of what this would look like, but it's basically teach the OSSs to talk PSIFs. So then you can, in parallel, have your Windows clients talking directly to the OSSs just like Linux clients do now. And you get rid of all the integration with Windows, landing issues, compiler issues. You have a much smaller code base. I'm actually really liking the idea, but as far as I know, it hasn't been scoped. So it sounds wonderful, right? But we're going to have to look at the code and actually see how big of an effort it is and how much of the code has been prototyped. So this is something that I'm especially interested to hear from people if this is something that you're interested in seeing scoped. I like the idea, but we'll see. Feedback is encouraged and welcome. Please let me know if you want to see the items, especially the items in red, if you have opinions, if you talk to users, if you have applications that care about specific things, let me know. There's also going to be a proposal very shortly for OpenSFS to fund part of the development. If this is something you want to see funded, please let your OpenSFS board representative know. Don't let me know. I have to recuse myself from the conversation since I'm the one asking for money. Let your other board members know. Since I have a little extra time, I wanted to talk about E10. At LUG 2013 in San Diego, I talked a little bit about what they were doing and who they are. And I just want to give a quick update. So E10, for those who remember, it's an exascale effort. It was formerly EIOW. E10 is working on 3 distinct components. There's the interfaces component, the RAS component, and the simulation and modeling component. So on the interfaces component, they have an implementation in progress. They're working on a prototype. This is fantastic news. The contact for this is Jonathan Jowdy. He works at Parallel Scientific. So they're using the Haskell programming language. They're working on a POSIX schema. And so with their storage interface and implementation, they're doing in-memory testing and debugging. And they've got a container manager, namespaces for distributed containers. And so it's exciting that they're getting a prototype going. For HA and API, so we've got the HA, the high availability. This is right so that nothing fails, everything routes around something else so that everything is up and working all the time, just like we want. The contact is Matthew, and I'm going to butcher his last name, but it's Boskluk, I think. Anyway, Matthew's the contact for this, and they're working in achieving a consensus among the nodes and working on an implementation in progress, which is always, you know, I'm always excited that there's actually something happening that I can compile and run. The file system interface, at the last meeting in Seattle, Nikita Danilov from Xyratex proposed an interface. So he's calling it the Clovis interface. There's a object store interface, and it has key value pairs, key value based metadata. It works with the concept of transactions. This is very different than the Fast Forward initiative. Fast Forward is working on epochs. So it's got this concept of transactions, which I think is pretty cool. And it's got a full interface. So take a look, if you have time, at the API from Nikita. So now moving on to the different components. So the modeling in RAS is working. What they want to do is an always-on telemetry. So you can never turn off. There is no concept of the system running without gathering data. And at first I heard this idea and I thought, gee, what are you doing? You're impacting performance. Why would I want that? But the more I look at it, the more they're collecting useful data that we can use to make things faster. And I kind of went, okay, well, I'm seeing where you're going with this. And even more I look at it, they're working on anomaly detection and root cause analysis methods, which are really cool. You know, one of the big questions as an administrator is always, what happened to my file system? Why isn't it working? Why isn't it going as quickly as I want? Well, their goal is to collect these data natively in the file system to figure out what's happening. So I think that's, this project has really, really grown on me. I really like the ideas. So they're working on these solutions, and they're working on a learning engine, which is another cool component, so that you can simulate how fast you should be going. You know, am I getting what I should be getting for speeds and performance? This is some current activity in the modeling and simulation. It's the SIO project. Am I pronouncing that right? SIOX. Anyway, this is a project involving the data collection and the analytics. It's run by University of Hamburg. And they're targeting exascale. So they're providing fine-grained system performance, locating and diagnosing problems, learning optimizations to be fed back into the exascale system. So they have an architecture available, and their early prototypes are under development. This is the simulation and associated components. The project is involving development of the I/O simulation engines and log editors and simulation drivers. Sai is the contact for this. Sai is here today, so you can talk to him more about the simulation engine and utilizing the queuing frameworks that he's doing. It's a really exciting project. Future meetings. E10 is, their next meetings are actually mid-October. I believe there's one in Beijing and one in China. Is it Tokyo? One in Beijing and one in Tokyo. And then their next meeting after that, they're having an SC13 BOF. So I encourage everyone to go to that and check out what they're doing. They also have regular conference calls, so you can always jump on the conference call and see what they're doing. And that's all I had for today. Thank you very much. Any questions about E10 or the Windows native client proposals?
That's a question on the Windows native client. You haven't touched on the Windows login to UID number mapping. Is there anything implemented?
I don't know. I will write that one down and look into it.
So could you comment on PSAP's development? Because I haven't heard lately anything. I mean, I know that there was a project with Chris Hertel, but he works for Red Hat now, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Is that still ongoing project or?
I'm sorry, could you ask the beginning of the question again? I
My
didn't
question
quite...
is, do you know, can you comment on PSIF's
Yes.
state?
Yes, Xyratex owns some of the code for PSIFs, and no, it's not particularly active right now, but it could be. PSIFs in general, right. Xyratex, okay, sorry, I'm being corrected. So Xyratex doesn't own PSIFs in particular, but there is some code that was acquired through the CFS acquisition, I thought. Maybe that's some of the Windows prototype. Okay. Okay. Okay.
I haven't followed up, so I don't know what's going on. That's why I asked you. You mentioned PSIFs.
Okay. No, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have tried to comment. But it is, like I said, I just heard the idea a couple of days ago, and I really liked it. So maybe we can look into what's happening with it and maybe try to resurrect it.
You mentioned, I think it was somewhere at the end, that they also apply like anomaly detection algorithms to like detect anomalies. Can you give more like details? What kind of algorithm, or there was also a slide on machine learning?
Yes, I'm going to let Sai answer that one. Can he have the microphone though?
I think Julian Kunkel from University of Hamburg, they are looking at some of the data analytics portions today, and there's some of the folks from NetApp, they are looking at the machine learning components. So they are looking at a whole bunch of algorithms. I could put you in touch with Julian, or I could put you in touch with the NetApp folks. They could probably give you more information.
Or you could join the phone call.
Yeah, you could. I'll send you a mail if you could just give me your contacts. We have calls every 15 days.
Right.
We have tried to arrange
yeah.
we have tried to arrange the calls to make sure that as many people can join. If you could just, we'll try and arrange that one so that it works for you.
Yes, global timing is always a problem for phone calls.
Any other question? Well, thanks.
Thank you.